All right, everyone. Welcome to my stream today. I've been last minute doing bug fixes, which is pretty par for the course here. It's one of those things. I didn't advertise a stream earlier just because I didn't have time to create a cover. And then as soon as I'm like ready to advertise it, I realized that there's actually a pretty big regression that would actually get in the way of me doing the stream. So I fixed that this morning. But I still haven't done the latest the latest stuff. So for like a new beta release. So I'm just actually in the process of pushing that out right now. Nice. Okay. So everything is perfectly clean now. So I'm just about to press go on that PNPM change set version. I know you guys can't see what I'm doing because it's on my other computer, but I'm very excited today to go a little deeper into Solid 2.0. We've talked a lot of theoretical stuff. And then the last stream, I knew that the beta was going to be pretty broken out the gate. So I just used it as a excuse to kind of test it, right? Um, Today, I've fixed a lot of stuff in the last 2 weeks. So today, I think we can actually like showcase some of the mechanics a little bit better. I mean, not that last week or 2 weeks ago didn't showcase some pretty cool stuff. But yeah, anyways, yeah, everyone come say hi in the chat. The AI thumbnails are getting out of hand. I want to talk about this a bit too, because see, I have a very different perspective, and maybe it's because of my age, and I think maybe this is going to be one of those things that, like, when people call people boomers or whatever, that kind of perspective. Um, I think my perspective on AI is kind of like they'll be probably making fun of millennials, in a few years, because I don't like a lot of people see a lot of AI stuff and they consider it cringe because I understand because of the low amount of effort it takes to generate or create stuff. But um, if you were going to spend a low amount of effort anyway, I think the output's better. I don't. I don't like I've been getting a lot of pushback on using AI generated images, and I'm like thinking about what I would actually use instead. And I mean, we can look at this on stream, actually, give me a second here. But let's look at the YouTube covers that I create versus the YouTube covers when an artist creates them versus the YouTube covers that AI generates for me. And you tell me which ones are the best or the worst. But we can do this right now. Yeah, we're gonna talk about this article a bunch today because I realized kind of like in hindsight, like I'm very much down on a path, and the article is an introduction of some topics, but a lot of people are like, yeah, so what? What does this mean for Solid? I'm like, I thought I laid that out, but I didn't connect those dots. So yeah, I would manufacture these. Yeah, yeah. Well, I am a programmer, not a visual artist. So I'm going. I'm. This is kind of what I want to. Let's just do this right now because I honestly I keep on getting this feedback, and I'm sorry, you guys. I think it's a very. I think you kind of got to look at it for what it is. So let's look here. Let's go to my YouTube channel. And yeah, let's just call it out right here. Okay. So these are some video covers that I made myself. So these ones, actually AI generated this image inside the painting. David made this image. I did this one, and I did this one by just putting these three labels on top of a pre-made image. So I didn't really make this image. Okay. But let's look at my live streams because there's more examples there. This is a live stream cover where I took a stock image. This is an AI generated image. Actually, let's just go right off the top. Okay. AI generated, AI generated, AI generated. Um, Actually AI generated, but then I put the labels on top. This one is someone's art, so I gave them credit for it. I found someone's art. This one is AI generated. This one I found a stock image and put the word async signals above. This one I found a stock image and put micro front ends done first. This one's a screen cap from a talk. This one an artist actually created. They took the image and they put it together. Or no, maybe I did this one. I feel like this is better than what my average. Guys from Marco made that one. This is from a slide. I took a pre-existing image and put a slide on it. This one was AI generated. This one, I took a table and put my face on it. This one, I took an image, put my face on it. This one, I took a photo that I took on a mountain and put my face on it. Image, put my face on it. This one, actually, I had to layer some fire on top and a logo on top of a sci-fi image, screenshot image. Oh, yeah, look at this one. I just took an image. I also just took an image here. This one's AI generated, kind of looks weird. I like that these old AI generated ones are a lot worse than the new ones. Like they actually garble stuff in a weird way. Took some like Iron Maiden background and put a logo on it. An artist made this one. My point is I don't. An artist made this one too. I don't know if this was AI help, but this was made by an artist. Stock image. My point is I actually think on average the AI images are better than like when I do something like this, like where I just like take some stock image and put a font on it. For articles, I love low fidelity hand drawn sketches than AI. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to hand draw those sketches. We can do the same exercise on DevTube because, I mean, I forget where I got that image from with the solid in there. Someone might have created it, but if you look, my articles are infamous for using like clips of Twitter, and which is why a lot of them are no longer around, or meme drawings, because literally I'm not creating the art, right? Like I find like stock image clips and then I find memes to support them. Like occasionally there's diagrams, but see, one of the things I learned really early on with articles is, especially dense articles with a whole freaking lot of text and a lot to get on, you have to kind of force the gaps in for your readers yourself, because otherwise if you just give them the blob, it's going to feel heavy. It is already heavy. So things you'll see that I do very often is between sections, I'll add extra like line spacing, like these kind of dividers, even though I don't really need to. I learned this earlier from editors when writing articles. Is just you're writing highly technical articles that were very dense, and people will probably reread sections multiple times and they'll try and get through it all. Breaking up the flow is incredibly important, even if it's just like for spacing things. Like these are just blank spots without any images. The images let them like temporarily relax their brain. So like there's a whole like I will fight people on this AI image thing because to me it is 100% improvement. I don't understand how people could even argue otherwise. They look cheap, but are they worse than me literally going pixels, atomic, atoms in space? All right. Reactivity expanded, cover, chopped. Like that, this is basically what you're getting in here we go. This one looks like one I would use with a like a graphic designers can do the work, but am I going to hire graphic designers every time I want to write something? It's just completely insane to me, the pushback on the AI image generation stuff. I get like if that's not like primary goal of the thing, and the actual goal is mechanical in terms of actually spacing and writing. Like as I said, the memes where they fit are a lot better, but the images are also valuable. And if you look, I've been using this pattern forever, even if it's not. I also, obviously have code examples where I can do it, but in stuff that's fairly like conclusion, like what is this? It's a spinning top. I mean, some of these make you think more, but let's compare this to like an AI generated image, right? I actually think this cover makes a lot of sense, right? You have like signals kind of like flowing through, and then you have like this rocky, hazardous place, but then where React sits, and like it actually has more contextual meaning in terms of what the actual article is about, right? Sometimes these text things are a little bit existence, but like it actually better corresponds with what is being said. And obviously if I don't like the images, like I kind of tweak or look at the like the kind of takeaway, right? Like the art of actually choosing these images is like a little bit tricky anyways. Like client-side routing without the JavaScript, does that cover make any sense to you? Like it makes sense to me. I'm playing on it. I apply the same kind of thought process into how I look at AI images when I find like an opportunity to kind of play around with the idea. Right, like to me, the process is the same, but the results are just infinitely better. I don't, I don't, and the funny thing is, I've been getting pushback on this repeatedly, but it's like, it's not like the pushback has an actual workable suggestion or solution behind it. It's just like, I don't like this. And it's like part of you got to go like, okay, well, I have to think about why they don't like this and what that actually says. But then when you like think about the actual output quality in a holistic sense being better, it's hard to like really care that much about the I don't like this. You don't see the value in creating image yourself, then you can't pretend any image in the article adds value besides space. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's mostly space, and then like a little bit of like visualization of a concept or a relational thing. It's just enough to trigger the mind to be like, oh, okay, I'm not. I'm getting out of the words. I'm just like, you know, I'm like it's a distraction. Yeah, sorry. Like I I think when I actually like solid start. Start. I mean, some of these like work. I mean, I don't know. I As I said, this is going to be probably considered a boomer taste because it's or type take or millennial take or something because what I'm doing is arguably distasteful, but it's like what it's replacing is not actually good in any like intrinsically better in any sort of way. So like the people are like, oh, well, just get rid of the images. It's not. That is not the solution. So what I've done is found a way to streamline like my process to actually make a tangible improvement. And one thing I've noticed over time is that like the AI images have gone better, and over time, I think one of the funniest things, and we'll talk about this in a minute when we get into this article, but I there's there's something really funny here. I have a conversation here with a response in my to my article here. Where someone's like, let me see here. Where is it? I thought it was really funny. Let's see if I can find it. It was one of the very first responses to my article. Let me see. Okay, this one here. The uncomfortable truth you're naming, signals didn't fix the async problem, they just delayed it. React awkwardness wasn't a mistake, it was a shape that constraint becoming visible. The frameworks that pretend async is special case are the ones that will break first when the graph gets complex enough. Yeah, thankfully my work with 2 has shown that we don't need to be mutually exclusive things. We can consistently address async and keep all the advantages of signals. We just have to be open to it. Difference is you're building the constraints into a design instead of pretending it doesn't exist. That's the line between a framework that teaches you something and one that gets out of your way until it doesn't. Looking forward to seeing where Solid 2.0 lands. This was the first comment and response on my article, and I was like, wow, someone gets it. You know, like this is a really reasonable, well thought out response, and like a lot of times these are not the kind of responses I get. And then I make small clarification, and the person seems legitimately excited about it. I find out later. Are we having discussion about AI images and stuff? Yeah, a little bit right now, yes. These stock images are charming and authentic compared to AI generated ones. I suppose they feel stolen, and they like and they kind of miss a little bit. I mean, like, yeah, I mean it's tricky. The stock images are great when the artists give them for free, and then I can just credit them. Obviously, paying for stock images is a whole other thing. It'd be interesting to basically guide the AI to have the aesthetic of stock images. Like there's something about the stuff that, like, as I said, really is repulsive to some people, but doesn't bother me in even the slightest. But sorry, the reason I brought up this conversation here is apparently this isn't a real person, and I was actually talking to an AI. And I had no idea. Someone actually pointed this out to me on X. So, like, you realize this interaction was with an AI, and I was like, no, they just sounded like the most reasonable person that I've ever come across. And I'm like, that should have been my clue. um, if someone responds reasonably, they're probably not a real person. Um, and what I'm getting at is I'm I'm expecting these lines to blur even more in the future, to the point that the like current distaste that we're experiencing right now is going to be basically meaningless in a short period of time. Obviously, you will be able to tell, at least for a long period of time, the craftsmanship of a true expert, like of someone who's actually really good at what they do. That's hard to replicate. But um, if you're not in a position to pay someone to commission your artwork, um, like the funniest thing about this is, we'll talk about AI writing too, because I want to talk about this a little bit, because and we'll get into the topic today, but I want to talk about this again, because it's like, again, this is an example of where people's distaste of it. I read stuff for its value. The reason I don't like AI written stuff is because it isn't valuable usually. It usually regurgitates. It usually doesn't actually provide true insight. It usually doesn't position things in a sensible argument. It's too, like, the way it thinks what's logical, presents its argument, isn't like really all that compelling. Sometimes it feels like it's being like smacked at you with like a hammer. But if an AI generated article actually had relevant content, I wouldn't care if it was AI generated. Again, this is like such a weird constraint. The content is more important than the delivery. You know what I mean? Like there's an aesthetic artistry to certain things, but if that's not your primary outgoing goal, who cares? Like the important part is to clearly communicate. It's not like again, this is why I get the impression that my perspective is going to age very poorly or something because people might care about this stuff. But from my perspective, it's like focusing on the wrong things. People, like I don't get like, okay, let's flip this example around hypothetically, right? Like AI makes me feel undervalued, underappreciation. It's like the person didn't care enough. Flipped around, does it mean that the person found a more efficient way to get to the same means if the content is actually valuable? Like I'm just kind of throwing this out here. There is craftsmanship in the art, and if you have the time to do it, there's probably real value there. But otherwise, like, who cares? I mean, there's definitely misguided. Okay, and I want to give an example here because I agree with you. Like from the perspective of like earlier in the week, before I posted this, where I very clearly I basically asked AI to write me an article, right? Um, and sorry, let me just quickly get this release going. I just need PM change set version. I just want to see if I can just hit commit, so to speak, on this. Yeah, beta 4, beta 4, beta 4, beta 4. Okay, cool. Sorry, v2.00 beta 4. That way, like, it'll all be out there by the time we're actually doing anything important. Okay, perfect. And then commit that. Pre-commit, what the? It's fine. I'll get freaking, it's being weird right now. Some weird. Okay. But my point is, I wrote this forward here. Oh, sorry, just reading some chat here. Just draw some simple sketches that help neurodivergent people stay on a topic like Theo and Pirate software does. I will do that during my Scala draw. I have something to think, but like for articles, like you could be like, you should spend an extra 45 minutes to an hour actively working on your articles if it means the images are better. Or you, but like I have the code examples where they're relevant. Like here's an like sometimes I will just use the code highlighting instead of using an image often in my articles. I don't have infinite time. This is my secondary thing. So I mean, I guess you can appreciate that. You can be like, look, I don't appreciate that you don't spend as much time as you should on this. And it's like I'm looking for ways to spend less time on it. So, you know, the values in the content. We're gonna do some Excalibur today. If AI images are not for the kinds of thing, what are they for? I mean, that's an interesting question. I mean, this is pretty much I think the use of AI images is for like presentations or like little like yeah. Okay. Okay, now let's do this PMPM build, PMPM test. And if this all goes well, I will be releasing beta. In this case, imagery are a side dish to the point, not the art, and it's not there as the only main consuming the content. It's more to help pacing the reading. Yes, exactly. Okay, so I got AI to write something for me, and this is going to be relevant more to the content of the stream because I was like, I've been talking with Copilot a ton and like going over stuff, and I was like, which is more just like my think out loud thing. And I was like, I feel like all of these aspects kind of are pointing at a bigger truth. Can you help me like put that like get more tighter on what that truth is? And so I wrote this forward, and then AI wrote the article. And I've written, if you've seen on the stream, I've used HackMD to generate article type stuff in AI lots of times as like concept stuff, just like kind of like, oh, give me a sales pitch or a message to contributors or like some kind of like different types of writing. But you're right, they all kind of, it's not, for me with AI, it's not the phrasing or the pacing as much as like the line of argument they take is very indicative of like their personality, right? So like for me, when I look at this, obviously there's a lot of AI like things here, like the limiting factors, no machines. I'm looking for like the really there's always those real like. I'm just gonna drop this in chat. You guys can probably pick out the AI isms like hugely. Yes, Unsplash that didn't add much value anyways. Yeah, pretty much as far as I'm. So for me, this is that it's just an upgrade. Okay, so I'm gonna drop this article in here, the one about determinism, and you could probably see some of the telltale signs of AI here. But on the other hand, I just like I've done enough of this that it's very obvious, at least for me, when I'm like writing something, like I can't get AI to write the article I want to write. This one is basically a point form list, so it kind of works. But you can never get it to write a real human feeling narrative, I find. Async is no longer a side effect. It's part of where the value is identity, limits need that doc. I do think we should, this whole thing is probably worth talking about. March 9th, did I cover that on my last stream 14 days ago? Would have been the 4th. So yeah, we should talk about this content on thing. But my point is like, I do find myself using AI in new and interesting ways while I'm working on stuff. Like for my article that I did post, the one that we're going to go into today about React invariance thing, I basically asked Copilot, and I extracted this out at the time because I didn't want to like lose it in the conversation. I said, let's see, the outline below is an optimized for that title, sharp, competent structure to both values. Where is it? Depending, the article now reframes as two archer streams, still friendly like correct. Basically, I asked AI at the very beginning. I was like, I want to do an article about this, but I want to make sure that I don't miss any of the key points. Can you like give me like a rough outline of like all the points I should touch? And it did. And kind of like gave it like sections. The funniest thing is if you actually followed this for writing your article, you wouldn't end up with a very good article, in my opinion. And in fact, this is kind of what AI would have generated if AI had written the last article I wrote, because it would have been like, async rejected because to read the sync constraints principles, color sync track these reactive and the right variants but the wrong model around them. Shared constraints, both variants ran into modern UI's default streaming transitions, cannot have optional, color nullable, why nominal for suspense, blah 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 blah, design decision got right, must be exit from commits, blah blah blah, React got wrong, we're predictable double renders, effects when choosing rule to hook. What's all to like? You could already see that it's trying to build a narrative where it's like us versus them, because it's very to the point. That's the way AI doesn't like leaving things open ended. It doesn't like talking about general truths. It's like it wants something actionable out of it. So it's like every single section in here is like structured in this kind of like, and this is why you should do solid, blah 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 blah, and it's just like it's a bit much. And this is kind of like you could almost never trust, like I can already see the narrative gap that you find in these kind of articles. AI is biased towards sounding smart. Yeah, everything is bullet points. Yeah, I mean, I asked for it. If you actually want to see, I could probably pull back the original prompt on this. But I was like, give me an outline. Do not write me an article. Just give me an outline of what you think the key talking points would be around blank, right? And then I took this and I just started writing, and then I was like, and I kind of just like, I was like, okay, this is not the narrative. But what this is useful for me was it was very helpful for me to be able to identify like I mean, I already knew this stuff, but it kind of laid it out. So I was like, because the hardest part about when I write articles is, and my normal process is that I end up just like writing huge blob per sections and then deleting like half the paragraphs because I write too much. And then I go back and I'm like, okay, I realized something in this part, but I need to get it back into the original message. So I end up rewriting it again, and then I rewrite it again, and then I rewrite it again. Obviously, if you learn this in grade school, if you start your article with an outline, you can at least know that you don't forget anything, so you can actually write it into the initial narrative. Right? To be fair, it got all this information because Copilot might have a short context window that it keeps on sliding stuff out, but because I mean, I can probably show you here because of like all these conversations I've had over time and like things that it's kind of frozen into memory currently. If I just jump into a new topic today and ask it about some aspect of Solid 2.0 or something, it doesn't like remember the specifics, but it remembers the general thing. So like it's very much, it knows in principle what I'm trying to do. So, when I give it I was trying to, this is how I got the idea for the stream title today. Because I was like, I've been doing a ton of Solitude beta fixing. It's been 2 weeks since the last stream. I also published this article. It sounds like one of those deep work sprints where you disappear, but dropped a big piece of thought leadership, blah, 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 blah. I need to think of tomorrow's stream and I need a title, concept. Hidden physics of React and how Solid 2 solves them differently. Blah, blah, blah. That's ultimately what led me to where I am today. But it was it doesn't take very much context because of like the baseline that I've set for it to be able to jump directly into like what I need out of it. Um, Section R1 Solid 2.0. Let me see if I can. But I know people were really interested in this, so I'm going to show you this because this is actually a multi-day process that was going through while I was writing that last article. I need to write an article around the two controversial changes Solid 2.0 deferred commits and split effects. I don't want to write the article. I don't want you to write the article. They clearly have an AI voice, but I'd like you to help laying out the structure and the points. That's how the conversation started, right? And then the thing that I copied was I gave it some clarity, blah, blah, blah. And the thing that I ended up copying was right after I was like, so still giving it clarity. I'd rather lay out the article by headers and bullet points. And then like, how would you change this on where how would you change this on by changing the title? And then this was the thing that we just looked at. And then I just started dumping my literal intro, and I ended up rewriting the first thing because it didn't tie together. But if you look at this is like basically verbatim of like what actually ended up in the article, and except it basically was like it was it it added like As when you know, so yeah, I got rid of this part. Solitude left you. It's been a journey. Like it basically added the right periods and commas and kind of like semicolon type stuff. Uh, so then strong section media pivots this, then it's like, okay. And if you look, what I end up doing is basically taking, what do you think about framing for introducing async characters? I basically just dumped, because I use Grammarly, right? But Grammarly costs money for grammatical fixes. It just does like spelling, but for complex structure sentence fixes, um, it actually costs money. So basically what I would do is write like 3 or 4 paragraphs at a time and go, can you correct the structure of this? Everything involved with foundation line response, you never did option. The async moves us out of the impaired comfort zone. Async is about read write. That's a question what's available to scale up and can we hear something consistent. Interesting for most flitters in and out of synchronous declarative systems. At least that way it looks in most frameworks. By the time it's a different axis, we're on the same parts of the intersect. It appears unpredictable as impact the whole system. With a bit of work, you can model in a consistent way. Essentially, this process can take is essentially how I ended up with the article, right? So people noticing AI-isms weren't completely off, but I also wrote every single paragraph in here. As you know, I've been working with lots of things. It's been during a single threaded vote data. Just so they do some in the more found they start to territory. You know, where was the other one we just saying? Everything in the web building series, the entire platform is built separate the network around those. You know, like I didn't add this dash, but it fits better with the flow, right? The comfort zone, right things. That's the same thing. Blah blah blah. Too much for async. Looks at ephemeral state flitting in and out. Like this is my exact wording. Like it's basically a grammar corrector. But it's enough to give us a slight voice on this that I get rubbed people the wrong way. But AI could have never written this article. Do you know what I mean? Like when you go and be like, hey, with these points, write the article. It doesn't write this kind of narrative structure. It doesn't construct this sort of. I have not had any, and this shouldn't be surprising to you because it's not like it's a bit like trying to execute a plan without plan mode. The problem is with writing, plan mode would basically essentially force you to get the right tone, narrative structure, all that. You'd basically have to write the article, like you'd have to write the whole article first to actually sufficiently do what plan mode would do for code by comparison. And this is another example, and I'm bringing this up right now before we get into the more solid 2.0 stuff, just because this has been controversial. Because there, as I said, a lot of people talked about the AI-ness of this article, and they were upset about it. And I'm thinking about like, I know what if I'd set AI to write this article, it would be nothing like this. Like I actually have the artifacts as I was showing to prove that. But when I look at this, the way it reads compared to my Yoda speak, you know, this feels much nicer, much more professional, much more hopefully understandable than, you know, my writing typically is. It actually tightens up little bits of phrasing things where I miss words. Anyone who's ever edited my articles before they get published knows exactly what I'm talking about. I used to, for years, I've used like 4 or 5 people, like different people, different articles, but I always run my articles through a bunch of human review because they tend to not be understandable otherwise. If you look at my HackMDs versus my Dev2 articles, like the ones that I write, you can tell a world's of difference. Part of it is because of the amount of time I spend editing, but the other part is because I other people actually read it and edit it because what I write tends to not make sense. Copilot's like on something old, like GPT 5.1 or something. Bro, and right, which is what I was doing. I was posting whole sections and being like, "What do you think about this?" But that's what I'm saying. Like AI would not generate it. But when I see this come back, which is basically identical to what I wrote, but like added the spacing, timing, pausing, slightly rewords like a thing here or there, I'm just like, this is, yeah, honestly, this is much better. You know, add some quotations around my, like, is it my questioning? It's like, you're just like, okay, this actually reads better. It's a question of every UI understands for anything. Can I show this or expose something? Is this like, this reads a billion times better. I mean, I've streamed for 6 hours, so I'm sure we'll get to whatever you want to talk about. This is important though. I needed to get this out of the way, mostly because this is, yeah. Again, what is my goal? My goal is to clearly communicate with people. Yeah, this is the gist of it. The challenge is, let's say that this experiment was a little bit heavier handed than I usually go. Was it worth it? If it's less than 6 hours, it's AI. um, yeah, just replace me with the AI. Did it work? And the answer is, depending on who you talk to. I got that first comment in the comments, and I was like, yes, it worked. And then I find out that AI wrote it, and I was like, okay, well maybe it didn't work. Which is a little bit harsh. Sorry, I should do the publish command now. Sorry, I just need to quickly get my authenticator app going here so that I can actually publish. Do not challenge for the next 5 minutes. Okay. All right, thank God. Okay, beta out. Okay. Yeah. The funny thing is this. I'm going to talk about the contents of these articles in 2 seconds. But the last bit of this conversation is, I want to go to Reddit, and let's see if I can find what I'm looking for. All right, here we go. Great article. The TLDRs I illustrated, you basically have the deep. Oh, so the person. Oh, well, they deleted it. Okay, well, good to know. So is it only good comments now? Oh yeah, here it is. I think it would be helpful if you adjust your title and note in your post that this article is basically a subtle plug for Solid. You posted in the React sub. This isn't really advice for React dev. It frankly reads more as, haha, you React peons are stuck with this stuff and you don't have to deal with it in Svelte or Solid. Thank God Rick Hanlon, remember him? React core team had him on the stream. You're wrong. This is absolutely great content for React devs. It explains the exact reason for choices we made that I've struggled to explain to React devs myself, and several times even says it's not about the framework being better than the others. Thank you, Ricky. Thank you. Honestly, I think the takeaway is, even with AI, people still don't really understand anything. If they don't put the time in to. So yeah, I was really happy reading the article and seeing how much clearer the points were, and I'm like, oh, I wish I thought of doing it that way. Oh no, this is much nicer. Like, just little, it's the structure, this paragraph per paragraph were the same, but it was just like, oh, added this word here, paused here, and you're like, oh, okay, yes, exactly, right? So like, more people came to defense, so whatever. But yeah, this is, if you look at this article, it got downvoted on Reddit React forum, like past zero. Like basically everyone downvoted this article. No one upvoted it, which is insane. But it's also par for the course for Reddit. You know, we've often said that, like on average, the developers on Reddit are like YouTube comments sometimes are pretty low bar. Reddit is like the bottom. You know, you can like go on there, say something reasonable, and then I mean, it's almost like I think my response where I was like, it seems reasonable to me, got downvoted a bunch. Okay, that's not the message. It's 4. Okay, this was like -6 at one point. um, when I'm like literally saying like, no, that's not what the article says. Like, I'm not sure people on Reddit, like, I guess they would need to know how to read if they were gonna like write this stuff. But I'm sometimes not sure if they know how to read. Um. Anyway, so yeah, my takeaway on this is that maybe the thing that I thought I was attributing to the clarity of my writing is actually not my writing's fault completely. I thought that if I could like clean things up in a meaningful way, people would get what I'm talking about better. It could be still a problem with my narrative structure. It could still be other stuff, you know, because that's AI obviously didn't write that article. But um I like my narrative structure. I like the arguments I make, so I would never change that. Um but it's definitely frustrating when you write an article that's literally like, look, React fans, here's some ammo. You guys were right. And the person's like, you're just trying to rub salt in people's faces. You're just like, and it wasn't just them. Like there's multiple comments to this degree and like in this kind of thing. And I was just like, how do you get there? How like I do I just give up? Anyway, enough on the AI topic. Let's get to the topic at hand. I think I've probably talked your guys' ear off about this. I don't generally like talking too much, but I had to address this because there's a bit of an elephant in the room. Yeah. Well, we'll see if we can get Delaney on. I think Datastar is interesting because it tries to sidestep a certain category of problems, which I think in a sense the way I would look at Datastar just holistically before like going deep into it is it's it's really taking that HTMX perspective that you like Yagni, you're not going to need it, and just like, look, HTMX is just missing this last little bit. This is how you just stretch into that next zone a little bit farther. My challenge with this is once you introduce that zone, you you have a new set of problems you should be solving, and you can pretend those problems don't exist, and you can basically be like, okay, I'm okay with it. My scope is right here, and you'll be fine. It's kind of like a bit like some of the issues I have with Astro Islands. But then it's like once you cross that threshold, it's insufficient, and then at that point, you have to rethink everything, and you can end up where I'm sitting. So it's like there's this interesting tension between solutions that um you can clearly go, they belong over here, and one's trying to expand over more of the range. And the thing is, if you take those I just belong over here solutions and try and expand them beyond their range, sometimes you can hit a really sweet spot, but you can also hit a zone where you're butting right up against like models that would be more suitable for, like you're just hitting that piece. So it'll be interesting talking to Delaney and figuring out exactly where that line falls. React, and especially React Self is not a serious community, might seem. It is a big mind shift, but the thing is, and I think this is still true, Delaney still doesn't believe in shared client state. He believes that not everything has to go back to the server, which is key. Like that you can keep interaction while keeping that kind of like partial subview. The challenge is when you have partials that share state, like islands, same kind of concept. There's a fundamental mismatch here on shared state works with server side rendering, right? Like how do you get the old update panel thing? We're going to talk about it, I'm sure, when I get Delaney on. It's just it's kind of fundamental. It's not like a it's a physics thing, and I like talking about these things in terms of physics, which is the whole reason that I wanted to do the stream today, because these things feel like rules that are discovered rather than inventions, things created by people. And I think that's really important. Speaking of caching, the caching of other is really interesting. It's like they're doing content program. I mean, it makes sense to me, especially if they're using that with something like server islands. Like, I think we just need to. I mean, there's only a few core mechanisms behind all these things. And even if we figure out how to model the data or the transport layer like slightly different, you're still dealing with the same types of problems. You can like kind of shift it around. So I haven't actually looked at this specifically, but I'm guessing I'm guessing that's the realm in which it's operating in. I could be completely wrong though. Okay. So let's talk about physics here. I'm going to change my view slightly so we can get into the topic of today. Because I want to start with this article mostly. I think by HackMD about why Solid 2.0 is interesting, about temporal determinism and all that is interesting, but it's kind of like a AI point, and I don't know if we want to talk any more AI right now. I think I've made this point on stream over and over and over again, essentially that the shape of our solution is important, but there's no point talking about the shape of our solution until we actually look at the shape of our solution. So let's instead start from here, right? Let's start by talking about why React was right and why this is actually physics, not DX consideration. Right? And then we'll talk about how Solid 2.0 solves that. So if you haven't read the article, it's worth a read. React was wrong. React was right because Angular was oh so wrong. Or AngularJS original. Yeah, I mean, AngularJS had its challenges. I think conceptually, AngularJS came from a really reasonable place. It was like, look, we have data, we bind it, we update what changes. Honestly, anyone engineering a solution for front end at the time, that seems like what the problem was. You have a bunch of imperative writings all over the thing. Let's make it declarative. Let's just go this change to this change. Like it had the shape of the solution it knew it wanted to solve. It didn't have any of the guarantees on propagation. This is the whole problem with the early systems. They basically were just like a wrapper over jQuery, right? They're just like, okay, well, that's imperative spaghetti code. Let's make it declarative spaghetti code. Like the process in which we could like do these updates wasn't as refined, right? Back then it was just like about the abstraction. It was like, how do we get the DX? It's like, okay, we'll dirty check everything. We don't care. Just make sure that when I say that this state is tied to this thing, that it will update. That was our primary concern. React was kind of more like, no, we need guarantees here. Otherwise, it's Zalgo. Like literally anything could go wrong. Right? The problem with the React approach was it was too simple, right? It's both the benefit and the like. It's both. React was just like, who cares? Just re-render everything. And you're like, how can that be good enough? And they're like, you know what? We figured out a way to make it good enough. That's the whole premise. But it was never like arguably the best solution to the problem. but they didn't approach it like engineers solving a specific, like mechanical problem. They kind of were like, holistically, this truth needs to emerge from our system, right? And almost everything from there flows out from React. Does solid get compiled into web components? No, I don't know why anyone would want to do that. I mean, we can support web components and people can put solid code in web components, but it's kind of like web components are kind of a waste of like, I mean, they're just a thing. It's like I can have a component and then I can also make it a DOM element for some reason. AngularJS had its good sides. To this day, no modern framework has better modal dialog DX than Angular. Spent months trying to recreate meager powers in React. Yeah, I mean, and also I feel like Angular spent a lot of time fixing very specific problems that would fit their real needs. Sometimes React's solutions seem kind of heady, like kind of academic. And to be fair, I'm in an interesting place because with Solid 2.0, like at a certain point, you sit there and you bash enough bugs all over the place and like see these patterns emerge and you're like, the solution does actually need to happen at that level, right? The level at which React kind of tends to operate at. It doesn't mean you should like change to just doing what React does, but you have to like step back and be like, look, is there a systematic problem here? Is it our fault, right? Almost every major framework change in the last like 5 or 6, 7 years has been around that. Back in the day, it was originally just like pure DX play. But now new frameworks now have been mostly coming out of like, is it our fault thing and being like saying yes. Like Quick was like saying like, is hydration being slow, so like that piece our fault? And Quick's like, it's not the developer's fault. It's definitely the framework's fault. That's their premise. Solid's perspective was, is the UI getting updated slowly or like not as efficiently as possible on like weird like kind of like re-renders and all this kind of like obscure kind of weird mental model pieces the developer's fault? And it was like, no, it's the framework's fault. Like I feel like that has been kind of like the sign here. Originally, it was just like, I don't want to write jQuery anymore. But then it's evolved into like us recognizing that the abstraction or the tool should be providing something that it doesn't currently. Why do you hate web components so much? Okay, I mean, I can answer this actually pretty simply because they actually aren't that much of a problem in a certain sense. You could say that they're just extra. They're just like an option. And if they were just an option, I'd be like, okay, the problem with web components and why I have so much thing is they're unnecessary, and then their existence influences other decisions. So it makes it a very awkward place to be because basically we tagged on something that arguably is optional and then tried to base everything else off their existence in a way that like overcomplicates and undermines the ability to do things in the most simple, direct, and performant way. So it's like on the surface, as someone who using these APIs could be like, okay, well, you don't have to use web components. I can just use web components. In principle, cool, go for it. But like the reality is the impact of their very existence makes everything else worse. So I think I could even be okay with that, except for like web component people keep on coming around and being like, hey, want to do this or do this with web components. And it's like, if you knew what you were doing, you wouldn't even ask that question. It's like, yeah, sure, go ahead, do that with the web components. But why would I have to worry about that? Because like they don't add any value. Like it's less like, do you know what I mean? Like it's like it's a combination of like their impact on the platform and the fact that like people seem to be like really wanting to push them when like it almost like not understanding what they do. And it's kind of like you have to like repeatedly be like, okay, well, sure, like you can go do that with your web components. You don't have to do anything in solid to do that. We support web components. You know, we've taken that hit, but it's like, it's like I have to. It feels bad after a while being the one to have to deflate people's expectations around web components, right? You almost get kind of like annoyed or frustrated with the people pushing them because it feels like they're selling a lie or something like that's usually the challenge there. I don't, the technology in a sense could just speak for itself, but there's a lot of misconceptions around them. And it's not that I don't think that they're incapable of doing things. It's just like, it's one of those things where it's like, yes, you can do this with web components, but then like you can also do this without web components and it's arguably better. So why are you conflating web components with this thing? So you don't hate web components, you hate the culture around it? Um, I don't have the same conflict with React or that. I think the thing is React knows exactly what it's doing. I mean, maybe not all of its fans, but React actually generally is fairly straightforward. You know, like it's very clear to me at least what the trade-offs and the design decisions are and how that flows. It doesn't feel ever like it's dishonest. Anyway, what does any of this have to do with anything? Well, React's ivory tower and oversimplistic design gets us to certain places much sooner than others would have got to, because most of us were just building apps and just trying to build things. And if we hit a few awkwardnesses, we're just like, do we have the tools to deal with them? Yeah, we do. That's the pragmatic approach, right? You kind of like figure out where the lines are. I think there's a Ryan Florence tweet that we covered a couple weeks ago that was like this. And then honestly, you just when you have to ship, you just fill in you fill in those gaps with whatever crap you have available, and you move on. I mean, AI works the same way. You just kind of move forward to it. At a certain point, though, you have to really ask about like where those lines are drawn. And in React's case, there's like two really, really big reactisms that piss people off a ton. And I think it's important to look at why they exist. One of them is the set state and then state not committed one. And the other one is the fact that they have these dependency arrays. Now, the set state and state after one wasn't always a clear picture. In like React's 0.13 or 0.14, like 0.14, 0.13, there were cases where you could read the next state, and eventually point they were just like, no, stop doing that. We need to make this we need this like settle on this one behavior. This one is funny because I'm calling out effects particularly because you don't need, the reason that effects are special here is because technically the side effects should happen independent of the rendering. Like dependency arrays on your use memo or use callback or whatever like other mechanisms you're using in React aren't necessarily important because you know that that code's all going to run during render. It's basically part of the render pure part. So the mechanical need for dependencies might, you know, be seen as a shortcut. But for effects, you do need to know the dependencies before you run any effects, because those dependencies, like you need to make sure that all the effects run at the same time. If you run some effects and then you get interrupted or something can't go and you run other effects, you end up with torn UI. So you have to make sure that you know all the dependencies up front. And Signals libraries kind of got away with not necessarily doing this because you can kind of ask for the data wherever you need it. So they're just kind of like, okay, well, we'll just create effect, you know, whatever, read the stuff, and then it could, you know, it'll just get it. And who cares if like we process some of the pure calculations late, if it's a lazy pull system, or if we, do some part of an effect and then do some other stuff and then do some other effect and do this and kind of isolate it across, because there was no possible way, because everything is synchronous, for any of those interruptions to escape that render frame. Like you knew for sure that, some stuff might kind of flitter around a bit, but in the end, you're going to end up with, in the same tick, you're going to end up with a consistent UI. And I think once you understand like these kind of two fundamental things don't hold up during async, you're posed with a very kind of interesting question. And I think this is why I want to talk about this. And I'm talking about this like physics, because this is kind of a fundamental truth. I'm very open to people in chat arguing with me, saying why both of these things in React are terrible. But try to argue that these aren't necessary is a much harder task. Is your latest YouTube video a good introduction? Not really. My what React developers should know about signals is a good introduction to React developers who at least know like what a signal is, and then they've been hearing all this bad stuff about it. It's mostly myth busting. I don't have a great like intro to signals video in the same way that I have an intro to signals articles. But even my articles, like how to build a signals system, depending on what level of what you're looking for, you might find it better elsewhere. An only thing a program with effects can do is heat up your CPU. Yes. And a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about today in terms of physics is kind of understanding this, like, if a tree falls in the woods and no one's there to listen, like, did it make a sound? Like, that is part of what we'll be talking about today. React's biggest gotcha for me personally is that useState doesn't update when you source it from a prop, and prop changes later use effect. Yeah, almost everyone does this. This is why Solid 2.0 directly addresses this. I also want to talk about why Solid 2.0's design is better than dependency arrays, even though it feels like dependency arrays. This is a problem not unique to React at all. And I came to the same conclusion about 3 or 4 years ago when I started working on Solid 2.0 designs, when I realized that this was like the biggest source of people needing synchronization, is that when you construct the graph, you can't create the dependency through state, which is kind of crazy because React re-renders. Almost everything about React makes you think that like you would. Like, oh, if the props change coming in, I should be able to reset my state. And the answer is you actually have to create a side effect to do it. Now, you can key the component, but that's such a brute force way of doing it. The other thing is you can derive your actual state from your local state and the props, and then kind of like calculate it inline. That will also work. But these are very like complicated ways to do things that are very clearly trying to set up a graph like dependency change in a re-render model. I just said it's not unique to React at all, but it feel like at a certain point I was like, this is the gap. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you've seen Solid 2.0, but that's exactly what we did. You're in the stream, you definitely know what I'm talking about, right? In React, when you have useState and you pass a function to it, it's a safety guard for when you have work to do. If you want to know what I mean, for people who sorry, not Excalibur, I'll just use Solid Playground for explanation here. We actually use this trick on Ricky's stream, but essentially, like when you do use state in a React component and you have something like expensive. First of all, if you could do use state 0 and your component reruns, because I'm gonna call it count. count set count. Let's choose this because you might have moved count, like did an event and set it to 3 or 4 or whatever, because you have to persist this state in React. When like the component reruns, it doesn't reset it back to 0. It keeps whatever the count is. It makes sense. But the problem is if you had like expensive calculation is how your thing, it would be, the problem is because this code actually runs, even though it returns back out like a cached value out of here, because this reruns every time, you wouldn't want to do that. So React gives you the ability to pass the function in, but the function only runs initially. Essentially, it's just a way of guarding. So it's like, look, if someone passes a function into use state, don't rerun this expensive calculation. Keep the cached values. Only run this initially. So it doesn't solve the problem, right? Whereas if you have create signal, your components aren't rerunning, and for that reason, this behavior is implicit because it will never rerun, so it will never run this out again. So the fact that this updates is fine. You'll never have to worry about it, which lets us overload this now. Like basically this would be perfectly fine because the component only runs once. But it means we can do this too and have the function, like most things in a signals library, mean that it actually reruns. So whenever the props change, you can reset. So this behavior of deriving state, which is very natural, is something that we can do very naturally in this model. Yes. Yes, exactly. You want to reset. This happens a ton in forms, and what most people do is they put use effect in. The better solution is to the things that get allocated and throw away immediately tend to have way less of a memory impact than you'd expect. I've found. But yes, this is a source, and it's a little bit off topic today, but it's a key place to kind of show like how you can adhere to the same sort of physical rules, but by slight adjustment in the execution model, not be subject to the same downsides. Okay, so with something like this, all like 70, no, I'd say 80% of state synchronization bugs, or sorry, needs for effects go away right off the bat, because suddenly you're not like writing, like there's so much wrong with doing this, right? Use effect. Sorry, let's go back even further. I'm gonna go back to the video. Yeah, there's so much wrong with doing this. Now props dot value depends on props dot value. Cause it's actually telling the component to rerun again right off the bat. Like because it runs, sees a state, uses the effect. Now the effect doesn't run until afterwards. So it goes through, renders with count being 0. It's possible that if it sees this no, actually wouldn't even know even with that invalidation. It renders with count being 0, and then it cycles through and renders again. You've never had to do this with. You're telling me you've never done what's in front of me in React. I feel like you hit this problem within the first 2 hours of using React. Like every developer has hit this problem. You've never used use effect to synchronize state. Sorry, I'm like, whenever you see those horror examples on Twitter with forms and all that, it almost always boils down to someone doing something like this. Like, React had to write a whole doc section specifically on avoiding this pattern because it's literally what everyone does. Yeah, people do it now, but this is like this is like the dumb pattern. Everyone, I don't know if React ever suggested this was a good pattern. We have UI live management, lots of fun. We have tons of this. Yeah, like this is the problem is this is a very common shape. It's called the ephemeral override state, like scenario. Like this is like what is a good pattern in React? Sure, two things. The easiest pattern for this in React is this. Let's do value so we can see it. The easiest pattern for this in React is that when you call this component, you do this key props.value. If you do this, every time value changes, the whole component's going to reset, which means it's going to create new state hooks, which means it's going to get the latest value. Right, like it's basically going to throw away all your previous state and reset it this way. This way you don't need synchronization. Now, obviously, if you have multiple of these, and then you have to come up with like an interesting, like if key or value, like, I mean, I guess you'd be fine with it over re-rendering, but you know, get all your depths in here, so to speak. You know, I guess if I made this an array, that would be awkward because then the array would be a new instance every time. But you can basically create your dependency array for your effect in your key prop. Really? I'd be interested at some point to hear how why broke your brain. I mean, unless it's like what I've been talking with the async stuff, which I think is breaking everyone's brain. I understand the thing. I just don't see reasons to store a prop value and use state. Okay, picture this. I mean, the example with forms is really easy. I have an input, right? Actually, I deleted too much. Function input. Okay. So now it is an input component. Okay. Input component. Okay. And our input component is going to wrap an actual native input. Okay. Now, we want some sort of way of this component saying what its value is, but I mean, it's going to be a complicated input. It's going to have like other functionality in here, which is why you wrapped in a component. But we also want the ability to manage it in here. So like, essentially, we don't want to save. We don't want to do like this. Like, we don't want to like on like input might not be because it has immediate feedback, but like some kind of component like on save or something. Like we don't actually want to pass our information back until we commit it. Like let's pretend our input has a button to save instead of like instant typing. So our input basically wraps like you have to press enter to commit the value. So there's this temporary state that essentially gets initialized from here, but does not get communicated back up here to get pushed back down. It actually stays inside the component while you're editing it. And then when you press like enter or on save, it actually communicates the information back up. So in this scenario, if the input ever coming in changed, you need to actually reset this count, but you also want to have a temporal override until you're ready to communicate the change back up. It's just like a temporary state. I use an input here, but basically the idea is that you have some kind of like temporary like scratch pad that doesn't impact the rest of the system. It just lives locally, right? In this kind of scenario, you're going to need to initialize it with this, but then you're also going to like, maybe there's a button in here too. I mean, I'm just making stuff up here, but then like on click, this calls on save, right? So at the end, when you click on save, it will hopefully, we'll do something like, value, you'll probably set it to like set my count to value, and then my count or whatever like is here. Like you'll close the loop, but generally speaking, this has to be, even though it's derived from this, it needs to it needs to have its own temporal override. And as I said, this pattern is relatively common. Forms are where you see this like a billion times, but it also happens in other situations, like just like places where you need to isolate changes from the global store, or like places where you like any place where you do some kind of speculative change, and it doesn't have to be like over the course of like a specific life cycle, right? We're not talking about like optimistic updates necessarily. We're talking about like something that could persist a while. Sometimes errors are another example of kind of like a speculative kind of override, where the life cycle isn't necessarily tied to either the action itself or to the persistence in the store. It's, these kind of patterns naturally emerge. Well, that's what I was getting at. With key, you'd have to like somehow register them all, and any of them would actually cause a change potentially. If you, I don't need to go too far, but it's like React docs have a whole page on this. When not to use effect. You might not need an effect. Beautiful. These docs are worth reading for every single person in any framework, but it's very React specific. But I think this is important. React Key is such a hacky solution. Yeah, I don't like it, but I understand because it's often the simplest. Like the example is literally what I talked about. Like this example here, the obvious answer is you should just derive it. Like this is a use memo case. You don't need to like make it a separate state for full name set name. But what if it's writable? Then you actually, well, see the if you can calculate it during rendering, this is better, right? But sometimes you need it to state that little thing. But like they have a ton of examples in here. This like React knows this is an issue, which is why they have quite an extensive thing, right? Post request. Like this is so common. Where's the key example? It should be. Yeah, here's the key example. This is the general better approach where you like, but even because what this can do is React smart enough that if you invalidate its own state in the course of rendering the component, because this component here is like the state is part of the same component, it goes, oh, when it go before it like renders the component and the JSX structure, like the virtual DOM, but then before it actually tries to realize it or reconcile it, it goes, in the process of this, we became invalid again. Don't continue. Don't go on to the diffing and patching stage. Rerun this component with the updated state again. So it's more effective. If you use effect, unfortunately, you actually cause a full render cycle where it actually does do the diffing and patching and then comes back around again. So this is better to do inline writes during the course of this. But I mean, this is also kind of weird because it does cause the component to re-render again. But because the component is the only, how should I put it? Because the component is the only unit of reactivity that React has, it actually, like, it doesn't have many choices here. Rerunning the component is better than running the render cycle. Most of this article is just David's. Yeah, David from XState made it this thing. Anyways, I'm not here to necessarily solve React's problems for you. This one is solvable. And I showed you how we solved that with Solid 2.0. Very simple. You just derive the state. Done. Whole class of useEffect just goes away. But these two problems are trickier. No, it's actually it actually stays working like create memo. The reactive update overrides your local setters. The idea is that the derived value is the override. So you derive it initially, you can override it, and then it can always be reset by the derived state coming in, which is what exactly you want in all of those use cases. Now, you could be like, well, what if I want it only to initially work reactively and then just override it? Well, I mean, in that case, you didn't need any of this mechanism. You could have just like untracked the read or just like set the value. Like that's the default because our components don't rerun, right? Like the default is like the default for all frameworks or like React is this. It's like it's derived initially and then you override it. And it's all the hard part is actually making the override or making it reset the override, right? So I want to talk about both of these because these are controversial because these are arguably the things that people love most about Signals and hate the most about React. I can just auto track anything. I don't have to this delayed commit because I can literally just ask for the signal or the derived signal or anything down the chain afterwards and get the answer right away. And the problem with async is those two things are no longer true. So let's start with probably the most controversial truth, even though it's the least deniable one, right? No one can argue with this first flush one, and I'll kind of explain a bit why. Okay, now this whole thing is just explaining just async. We can talk about that in a minute if we have to, but I want to talk about this commits thing first, right? I've covered this so many times in the past, but I wrote an article a while ago. Probably worth it. I was really struggling around the time Solid 1.5 with this. Sorry, is it possible to reset a derived signal to its derived value after updating it? I mean, that's what it would be doing, right? It reruns the memo and then that's what it ends up with. So this is an old experiment that I did where I was showing this React example where I had state, derived state, and then a DOM element. And I was like, after I set count, what the hell do we get if we log all three of these? So this is just a counter. Oh, we actually have that. It's called refresh in Solid 2.0. So yes, you could do that if you wanted to, but the primary way of doing that is actually just updating the reactive props. No, like you don't even have to set signal. You can literally just tell the computed to run again. right? Usually it will automatically run because the props change. But if the props didn't change and you want to do a reset, we have this specific mechanism. It's very useful for async, but it could be useful in this case where you're just like, hey, like reset it to like just rerun the computation again. Or in the case of async, refetch this again, like for invalidation. So yes, we do have this mechanism. The big thing is like having extraneous set values are kind of the things that I kind of want to avoid. I think like I think it's a lot cleaner to think about it like I need to reset this computation rather than like have to like write it back. Do you know what I mean? Like, because like there's more truth in like talking about the derivation of it than like just being like, okay, in this condition, then write this, and because I know that this is what the source is, then it'll be fine. I mean, you can do that, but that's not like as clean. Yeah, async refresh is literally rerun this computation. Yeah. Truthfully, the value shouldn't have changed in most cases, but here's another. But yeah, yeah. So but the reason I showed this is because this I was working on Marco. We discovered this, and then we realized that every framework logged something different. React logged 000, Vue logged 120, Svelte 3 or 4 logged 100, and Solid was 122. And if you look at this in the abstract, only React and Solid are correct, arguably, because like they're the only ones that are consistent. Like zero, if count is 0, then double count is 0, and then the DOM is 0, consistent. If you look at Solid, also consistent. If count is 1, double count is 2, and 2, it's 0. Svelte mimics JavaScript things because if you update count, then double count and current count couldn't be updated. So like it makes sense from a JavaScript thing because the stuff hasn't happened, but it is an inconsistent view. Like you're like arguably I'd argue you shouldn't be reading after you set the count, but it is there's like it's hard to argue with this expectation because it like in a synchronous frame it makes sense. And then Vue was kind of like we'll do the reactive stuff but not the DOM stuff. Now the truth is at the end of this article, I was like, maybe Svelte is just right. Because and the only reason I said this was because I'm like, React is so painful. No one likes React. This is great, but it can be bad for performance. Solid's granular, so like you can get away with doing this, but like fundamentally speaking, like as a general solution, if you do like 10 updates, you probably don't want to render 10 times. Sure, each update is pinpoint, but there's going to be cases where that's not the case. So as a default, this is like putting a little bit more on the user to be like smart about performance, and like this, like it's okay. I don't hate it, but it maybe not amazing. This one everyone hates. This one I can at least explain, even if it's like less than ideal. And this one is like this kind of magical happy place, but also maybe a lie. In the end, what ended up happening is everybody just ended up going to Vue, more or less. Solid is still on this right now, unless you call batch explicitly. But generally, my plan for Solid 2.0 was this. My Svelte 5 is this. And that's how we were all going to be here with Vue, and React was going to be by itself. That was the plan for Solid 2.0, like 4 or 5 years ago. In the last year, and arguably in the last 6 months, I just realized that React's version is probably the only correct version here, which is a really tough pill to swallow. Yes. Because the problem with these models is one is doable. Or sorry, Svelte is doable, but it's a little bit misleading. I could argue for this approach still, like I did in this article, but the problem with async is you don't know necessarily what is async when you're just like sitting here reading these values. Sorry, I don't need to go back to the original tweet, right? When you're sitting here reading these values here, like in this event handler, like sure, the async stuff is defined over here, but here you're just like, I'm getting count, double count. Like you aren't aware of this, and this could be in your UI under different conditions of loading. You want what you're dealing with here to reflect what your user is actually seeing. So like, let me go back to the article here, and basically the same example. I didn't put the DOM in because the question of when the DOM flushes is a question, but it kind of falls out of the other two, right? Like the reality is the actual question is what double count should show and what count should show, right? If you go back to this example here and you kind of crunch it down in, if you ignore the DOM, view and solid are the same. And then, and if you go to Svelte 5 now, actually we're all the same except for React, right? So that's why we're able to kind of do this compression. I'm not going to worry about the DOM. If you're React, clearly the DOM hasn't updated. And if you're the others, the DOM may or may have not updated, but that is secondary to the actual concern here, right? Hopefully everyone's still with me. So right, in plain JavaScript, count and double count drift apart. Signals fix this by updating double count on read. But this still leaves the question, when does this update? The DOM just did that. Okay, React was the only system that didn't update count immediately and people hated it. But the motivation was sound. React wanted event handlers to see consistent state and they had no way to update derived values until the component reran, right? It's like the Svelte example. Like React has the same conditions. Like old Svelte wasn't signals. It was basically like React. It wasn't a virtual DOM, but like even Dominic from the Svelte team called Svelte 3 basically a virtual DOM. Like conceptually, it had the same component rerun model. It just was heavily memoized. It was almost like the React compiler. That's kind of like how Svelte 3 was. So the thing is, when you look at the JavaScript of this, how could double count or the element have actually updated when you just set the count? It's not possible with old Svelte, and it's not possible with React. So you have the choice: either update the count immediately, which made sense for Svelte because they make it look like it's an assignment. They hide the set count thing. It's hidden behind like the compiler. So them not updating one seemed really weird, right? So the move from Svelte 3 to Svelte 5 was them being able to now do this, which made their story much more consistent. But this was kind of, all they could do before. React was like, no, we want to show consistent value. That was the only choice here. React could not make this value 2, even if it wanted to. Neither could Svelte 3. Signals let you make this value 2 if you want it to be. The question is, should it be 2? And you'd be like, obviously. But actually the answer is not obviously. It's actually probably no. Calling flush occasionally is better than having to do batch. I agree completely, which is why views kind of timing is what's kind of been where everyone kind of landed on, except for React and now except for Solid. Let me explain why. Now, obviously, if we looked at books.length directly, we could avoid this. But my point here is I wanted to show an example where you have some derived value, like length is easy to derive, but how about something more expensive, something that isn't as direct? You have some derived value and you're basically nulling out the source, right? If you null out the source and you haven't updated the derived value and you use that to interact with that source, like you're going to end up out of bounds or reading undefined or crashing your app probably, right? This is why I never liked Svelte's model. React, I felt like if you can't update the second value, you shouldn't be updating count, right? Like if you have no way of making double count updated, you shouldn't be updating count because this will happen to you. You will cause your program to crash if you put expectations on double count. Now, you can know that to avoid it, but it's not consistent, right? Like you understand here. Books length is 5. You set it to an empty list. This hasn't updated. You go books 5 minus 1 is 4. You read books 4 and there's nothing there. Maybe you read a property off it. Oh, guess what? You've thrown an error. Like this is Now, frameworks that do this have like tick or await, but to force the flush, right? But it's kind of like, and this is important to put in the other article. Every framework has an ability to mimic those other behaviors if they want to, but it's the question is like, as a default, should every time you set something cause you to call flush? Well, maybe you do want to read these values, so then the answer is yes. But if you don't call flush, should it break? And I think React's approach is a sane one, which is if you set books here, books is still 5. So when you pull out this book, you're actually seeing the book listing at 4. Now, should you write your code this way? Probably not. Right. The whole read after write is just like a bad smell that you shouldn't be doing. The problem is that with signals libraries, we let people feel like they could do this. We were like, yeah, go for it. We don't care. It was never a good thing to do, but we made it feel like it was okay. Yes, right. In Vue's case, you never need to call flush unless you read from the DOM. But there's a problem here. And reading from the DOM is pretty rare. Well, yeah, and you can conceptually be like, yeah, I need to read from the DOM. I'll call flush myself. Like it's an easy. It's easy to get there. You can go like, it's not like normal logic. Don't need it. I only need to call flush when I need the DOM. Will reading still signal throw? It depends. It doesn't have to throw if it has a value. If it doesn't have a value, then it would have to throw. But if it has a value, it does not have to throw, right? Like, as I said, like in React's case, reading books.length being still 5 or whatever isn't going to throw, right? So what does this have to do with async? Well, we don't know if books.length has updated it or not. You could write all your code like this, right? Write all your code, be like, I am synchronous, everything is up to date, I'm using signals, don't have to worry about the stupid reactism. And then someone realizes that this derived value, books.length, actually needs to be calculated from something on the server. And suddenly, you've produced this problem. Because this updates right away and you're like, sweet, empty. And here it's 5, it's out, and it throws. And it's not where you declared your async work. It's not happening in here. It's happening in the event handler. It's happening other places, because that async work might not even be in the same component. You've basically broken the graph, and you've basically, because you depended on this behavior, potentially have now crash errors all throughout your application. Only a problem with color things to do. Well, no. This is a problem. This problem is not with color, because all async becomes colorless once you pull it into the system. At a certain point, you have to consume it, right? I will say that the other problem we can talk about it where colorless async makes it trickier. This is like, if this was felt and I put await count number 2 here, double count, like this isn't colorless async. I mean, double count, like derived, if this is derived await count times 2 or whatever, if I did this here, it's not colorless async in the same sense because I needed to pass promises through in that. But as soon as I realize that value, I can't get it right away. There's no way to get double count from count synchronously. So this is not a colorless async problem. It's a realized value problem. At some point, you're gonna have to convert the promise into a signal, and if anything, or into like a value, and anything downstream of that suffers from this. That's not colorless async in the same way I'm talking. Like the reason that we talk about colorless async in Solid is because it's 2.0. It's because we really pushed that consumption point all the way to the top. It's where it enters the graph, and then we actually propagate it through all the reads, so we get to this like very cool, consistent system where like and I could probably draw it out for you, but where we can actually push the blocking all the way to the leaves while you can actually do the consumption at the top. It's actually really powerful. But even in a system that doesn't do that, makes you explicitly pass promises around, at some point you're going to eat the promise and bring it into your system. And at that point, you are no longer looking at the promise. You are looking at a signal or a value. It will happen somewhere in the graph, and anything downstream of that has this problem. It's fundamental. Yeah, right. Okay, so, okay, you can solve this by, yeah, okay. I see what you're saying. What you're saying is like, never consume it. Right, but what I'm pointing out is like, so yeah, okay, but you're gonna have to consume it to get it into your rendering system. I could say like, okay, yeah, well, fine, we should await books.length. So instead of breaking it now, what will happen is, I mean, you're still gonna have a challenge because you can now have to go all through your app through all the places where books.length is and go, okay, actually books.length is a promise. Hopefully your TS is going to complain because when you try and do books.length -1 here, it's going to be like promise is not a number. So then you know exactly where to fix. But as I said, it still doesn't change the fact that at a certain point you're going to actually consume it. You're actually going to use the value, right? You can push it down to the leaves as much as you want if possible, but there is something very fundamental about this. Right, but you understand, like, we're in an event handler. Are you suggesting that when we get into our component body, we should fork it so that there's a consumable version that we can just stick directly in our UI and then a version that we can await separately in our event handler? Like, let's be practical here. As I said, I've built this exact example in Svelte and seen this exact behavior, which is why I'm aware of it. I did an await derived, right? I think as I said, generally the Svelte model is in the right direction. I'm just saying, like, there's a certain truth here you have to address here, that there is going to be a point, unless you really fork the paths down to every last read point here, you're going to at some point absorb the async into your graph, and behind that graph you are going to break consistency if you flush the value immediately. Like, as I said, we can think of ways of how you can avoid it, like you're saying, but this is physics. This is undeniable truth. And the funny thing is, if we did do this, like make double count async in the Svelte example, it would show the consistent UI. Like, it would show like in the UI here, we would see 1 times 2 equals 2, then 2 times 2 equals 4. Like, it won't update it. It will actually hold the UI properly. But in your event handler in here, you will see 2 times 2 equals 2, so to speak. So you will break in exactly the way that I'm talking about. I'm not doing this necessarily to poke at Svelte. Svelte's solution is much more advanced and much better than 99% of the solutions out there. But this is like, this isn't like you're that's an option, but events are how should I put it? Events are side effectful, so it's kind of dangerous to rerun events. You wouldn't want that as a default behavior. I can understand why you're concerned. I'm just saying is you're not going to avoid this in a signal system. Even if you pretend like your async isn't colorless, once you absorb it, you've created colorless async. Now, you don't need to worry about it a ton in certain scenarios. But the reality is you block the graph. You can't not block with async. So if you block the graph, there's going to be part that is blocked and unblocked. This is, I said, the reason why something like Svelte will still give you the exact proper output in the UI. They know you block the graph. They're smart enough to handle that. Or why? You guys are gonna force me to make the Svelte example just to show you what I'm talking about, aren't you? Like, sorry, like to me this is so obvious. Like, but it's because I've been looking at this for such a long time. You have to, okay. The one way around it, I suppose, is you can choose never to consume it. Like, from a practical standpoint, you're probably going to do a calculation at some time or like do a compute it or something to consume it. Like the only way you avoid it is if, as you said, you literally don't do double count like this. You literally await in here, and maybe that's the answer. You never do an async derive, like basically await. Like you literally have to push the await to every single call point, which means that every derivation, everything you calculate off it, it has to go through like a then promise chain instead of like being able to just do something nice like count times 2 or double count 3 or format username to type. You have to force the whole chain through thenables and be very rigid to never resolve early. Or yes, this whole category goes away. The reason I'm bringing this up is because so many of these issues are based on like basically this kind of problem. Like think about it. If you built a system like React where it doesn't update after you call it, like you don't see it updated, are you going to read stuff afterwards in event handlers and setting state? No, you're not going to do it. Like React talks about pit of success. 000 is pit of success if you think about it, because why? If you know the value is never going to update there, why would you read it afterwards? If you actually want to update it, what you're going to do is you're going to take the value updated and use that further down in your calculation, right? You're going to be like, instead of using book's length or whatever, or even read books, you're just going to take this. You could be like new books and then go new books.length and this, and you're not going to read reactively afterwards. So React's API design actually guides you to do the right thing. It's so like we're fighting this so hard when the answer is like kind of obvious, right? We have a real physical constraint, something that we can try and work or hack around, but it's the wrong mindset to view these events as being inside the system. We have a synchronous system with events and side effects spinning out of them around it. If you view those as truly external to the system, you can preserve the integrity of the system. React hit here, obviously, because they had components, and there's inside and outside the component means very, very different things. But the shape of the problem is real. Yeah. Yeah, and to be fair, when we were working in Marco, we went even harder. I don't know if Marco 6 landed here, but we were like, I don't want to think about this. If someone tries to do this, just throw. We were just like, just error, right? Which is like the really like nuclear option here. But the other option, and maybe like, you know, maybe that's sane, but the other option is React's option is still very, very consistent. Like I get it why people are fighting this so much because this is a big departure, but it's you the the experience of what you have to force in order to get here and the impact of these changes in order to get here seems incredibly extreme versus the simple truth of this, like, don't do this. No, I'm not saying this has nothing to do with performance. This has to do with correctness. Um, I'm not quite sure what this has to do with. Are you just talking like threading consistency models? I mean, I don't think that's the case now. We have solutions with signals, arguably, which are not just vanilla JS things. We have ways to force consistency that way. The problem is these models fall apart under async pressure. Can you throw it to Donovan? No. Why? Why? What are we throwing? Also, I think it's also something reacting that people are probably, yeah. Like the funny thing is, the stream is like so hardcore on this stuff, and it's really hard for reactive people to kind of stomach. But if I show this stuff to Tanner, for example, he's just like, yeah, so what? And you're telling me I just solve all of React's problems, and this is the cost? It's like a no-brainer. You know what I mean? He's like, React already has this, and this is actually not even as constrained. Like it just seems like, you know what I mean? Like, yes, yeah, but that's what signals are. But I'm saying that doesn't actually solve it. You can't have a value you don't have yet. As Robbie pointed out earlier, your only way out of this is make people await here. Like, but it means that you're not consuming the promises ever, basically. Like you need to make sure that everything is a promise. Like you're running with two systems, a promise system and a signal system, which um could be okay, arguably. Um but it's like even Svelte doesn't force you that hard down that line. React doesn't. React has use. There's always a consumption point because at a certain point people are trying to write synchronous UI and declarative things to make it easier. They're not hoping to write yields and awaits sprinkled through every single part of their code. No, I don't think this stuff has to be costly. What I'm talking about is completely consistent. It has nothing to do with performance. It's about consistency. I don't see anything particularly expensive here. This is just like truth. It's not about performance. It's literally about consistency. So this isn't like something for AI to solve. This is not a like. Can AI solve gravity? We can build better planes, but like, you know what I mean? Like, we're talking about physics. So Svelte's a great example here because Svelte actually does all the right stuff in the UI. Well, mostly, for the most part, all the right stuff in the UI. But it's still because of the fact that their variables are like this that they still keep their original model here. I'm just saying, like, and I don't even think it's a big deal because as we all said, just don't do this. But in 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 reality, when talking about the whole thing, like, so basically Svelte does most of this. It just, they have this one inconsistency in their event handlers, which probably you shouldn't do anyways. But generally, there's this truth here, right? Like, we hit this when we were doing like transitions in Solid 1.0 as well, like where like inside transitions, Solid worked like React. Like you'd do the write, and then outside you wouldn't see the stuff until the transition ended. It's just fundamentally, to be consistent, it has to work that way because you're showing the user something. If they're interacting with it, they should be interacting with what they see, not some future state that doesn't exist yet. They have special stealth events. Have I missed that? I try and keep up on stuff. I don't know what that is. And I don't think looking special stealth events is going to find me on a query. I'm just saying this is, while you can ease up this constraint if you want to, in small ways, it's hard to argue that React is not the only solution here that is completely correct. It's arguably the most correct and honest approach, right? Like we can like pretend it's otherwise, and it will probably come to bite us later. But even if we can, this is the reality I had to face. I realized like I could do this. I could like force the reactivity through. I could make it so that this was updated, but in some cases, but it's kind of a lie. It's a convenient lie, but the problem with convenient lies are they will catch up with you. Like, I'm only thinking about the design space I understand right now. If you move to the future, you don't even know what kind of problems you're going to hit. So like, you kind of, it's usually better to err on the side of doing the consistent, honest thing than lying unless you are completely sure you can get away with lying. I know it's not something we love. Um, Dependency effects must be known at computation time. Now, this is true. The Yeah, yeah, but that's not solving it. Sorry. If I haven't made it clear enough, because people read this article and they're like, "Oh yeah, view handle." No, it doesn't. You can solve all of these using explicit APIs if you know to do that and guard them, right? As I said, I said this in the other article. Like, if you can use await tick or next tick in await tick in Svelte, next tick in Vue. I think there's might be a settled thing now in Svelte too. In Solid 1.0, you could get React's behavior originally by calling it in batch. Later, that was just a way to get Vue's behavior. You can, like in React, you can use the callbacks on the setters as a mechanism to get something similar to Vue's behavior. Like all the frameworks have escape hatches for the other behavior if you know to. The problem is if you start in one state, you don't know to change it. Like, it's not about like being able to do a wait next tick. It's the fact that you change your code somewhere and now you need to do a wait next tick in like 10 different places you didn't realize. I don't even know if I should read this one out loud. It's funny. The obvious solution is using Remix 3. That's funny. Um, so, sorry, what is Svelte's event delegation managing for here? It delays running events while things are held, but then it wouldn't even be showing them. So I don't, yeah, I'm not quite sure what, I've definitely reproduced this bug in Svelte. like 100%. It's felt 5. I mean, I get you're kind of asking the remix question. I get why people are thinking remix. I don't know. My gut here is that Remix has changed their approach. I don't know what Remix 3 is right now, but the version of Remix that they showed at the unveil, I am very much in the camp that that approach is not the way things need to head. I think they've refined stuff since then, but I don't know. We won't know until they reveal it, so it's hard to say. But if you're talking about the Remix as they presented it a few months ago, then even it doesn't matter if AI can generate plain JS code, because the problem is plain JS code doesn't have all the edge cases encoded into it, right? Next thing you know, you're like, we did this on stream a couple of weeks ago. You're like managing a bunch of extra states. Sure, they're not framework states, but they are effectively different states that you're writing to manage like the life cycles. And because they're not framework states, you're the one responsible for calling update. Who cares? Your code is vanilla JS, but you didn't take into consideration all the edge cases, and now you're talking about things like abort signals and stuff that could just be handled automatically from the shape of the graph, but instead you're manually managing this stuff. Yeah, I mean, you can create a debounce signal. Staplets. You can almost view um do you guys remember the Sierpinski's triangle problem that React did that proved concurrent rendering? You can almost view this as a form of that, because we keep our effects guarantees. We can debounce heavy work without impacting the rendering at all here. Because in a sense, how did I solve this terribly expensive thing? I just made a memo, request an idle callback to propagate its thing. So there's no effect here. It's just an async derived value. So I'm kind of basically leaving it up to the browser to schedule it. And because this still participates as part of our graph, all the numbers update at the same time, even though this is a hierarchical flush out. Like essentially, like, now if you want to detach from the graph, then you need to do a little bit more work, but that's like opt-in Terran, something that you want to do. Like what this is basically doing is like if I didn't have this promise and I just return seconds, then things get really bogged up here, I think. If maybe, sorry. Oh, I have to actually put the freaking fake timeout in. Sorry. Let's, before we return seconds, let's put let's put the work in. Okay, now we're freezing up the graph while we're moving because we're doing this expensive work that's blocking. See, we're making sure that our UI is consistent, but like, look, even the hover state gets frozen. Ooh, oh, let me get it. Let me get the yellow away from my mouse. But we can just inject async into the graph here. And now everything is smooth, even though it's doing stuff that basically takes the whole second to calculate. Anyways. You could, if you break out a synchronous flow, you can, and you would have to make it colorful, like in a way that even Svelte doesn't make it colorful. You literally have to like pretend that like you'd have to pass promises all the way down and never consume them by the framework. And in that world, but then the framework wouldn't be aware of, like, you would be I mean, you'd be what where things are today in most things. You'd be responsible for consistency. No, even then, like, how do you how do you make sure that one, like when it's zero, that it doesn't show one? Like you'd have to micro schedule everything. So like practically, I don't think so. What's the whole point of it is not very ergonomic. You color based on what might suspend versus instead of using promises. Yeah, you can maybe like I saw a really cool library this week. It was called Lazy Promises, where someone basically fixed all the problems with promises in libraries and wrapped the promise. But it still involved like basically abstracting something like a promise, like an async primitive, that was independent of the rest of the reactive signals kind of graph. Which, as I said, it's a direction, but it also doesn't give. It's like the opposite bet. It doesn't give you that. It's the opposite of the bet that React and Svelte and Solid are currently taking, which it doesn't give you this orchestration control. The orchestration control is really, really valuable because it lets us write our intent in a clear way while coming up with reasonable rules to isolate change, which means that you don't have to worry about what something else is doing over here versus what it's doing over here, which is very valuable in this age of AI, in my opinion. Huh. Of course it's you. That's why you asked that leading question. Can the framework await the promises? Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I see what you did. There is a model there. It's just not one that like we can do a lot more if, and you could argue that we shouldn't be doing this. The framework shouldn't be taking that on, but if we can do a lot more if we absorb that. Yeah, yeah. I mean, think about. Okay, can I put it this way? Stealth 3 was called the disappearing framework because it compiled all your JavaScript framework code into vanilla JS components. That was the argument. I mean, it's not 100% accurate, but that was basically the argument. And it did so by basically taking what you wrote and then generating a bunch of code that was very specific to the update paths. And in so was fairly efficient, and it kept the framework small because the framework didn't need to actually worry about very many things. It didn't need very many helper functions. But the problem with this is this. To do MVC size comparison. Obviously, another article I wrote, but I can't emphasize this enough. What happened to our app when we added 80 to do MVCs in it? Now, 80 to do MVCs might seem a lot, but it's also not a lot when you consider to do MVC is basically like one medium size to larger size component. Like maybe it's like 4 or 5 normal size components. So we're talking about maybe 300 components. Now, obviously code splitting and other things, but you don't have to get this far to see the scaling issue. React, Svelte is when there's one to do MVC is 3 kilobytes, and you're like, sweet, right? Where React's 37 back then. And now it's like more than that, but it doesn't matter. By the time we get up to 80, React's 134 and Svelte's 150. Because all that code it generated, because it didn't reuse helper functions, it wasn't as tight, it actually got larger. And actually when you added hydration to the picture, it got even larger because of the special code paths it used to have for hydration. This is like one of the biggest motivations, I feel, not the only one, but one of the big motivations why they moved to signals and something very similar to Solid in Svelte 5. Because Svelte 5 is like this. It does not do that. Right? And the problem was that to actually write the code, there was value in having a shared library. Like, and another way to look is the value of having like there's enough common patterns that abstracting it actually made a lot of sense. Now, don't get me wrong, AI could also design the abstraction as well, but in general, a general solution didn't kind of fit in, and more so when you consider all the edge cases you have to handle when, say, talking about something like async, the race conditions, like, and you can picture this yourself by, we did this on a previous stream, by taking something like React 16 style and trying to implement the proper async implementation. It's not nice. I actually showed this off on stream where we actually came up with something last stream, I think, where we actually came up with something fairly reasonable. Actually, it was the stream before, but it still was broken. And then we actually went through an example, but the simplest example ever, and actually fixed it on stream. And it was way more complicated than actually encoding that behavior in. So my premise here, and I was going to talk about this a little bit when I talked about the AI generated article, is that these, while higher level abstractions, opinions might get boiled away by AI being able to just junk this stuff together, so to speak, like meta frameworks, everyone's gonna have their own meta framework kind of deal. What all this is doing is putting pressure to push the core fundamentals into the language, into the core framework more. In a sense, React or Solid or Svelte or Vue or whatever is more like a programming language than it is like a library at this point, because of the way it abstracts over the JavaScript DOM and HTML stuff. We can talk about transparency, we can talk about differences of compiler, all this stuff, but generally speaking, it's better to think of it that way. So while, Beat Plus might release a new meta framework that's basically lets you do Svelte or Solid React or whatever, generally speaking, we're not talking about replacing React in that equation. Do you know what I mean? So from that perspective, there might be a reality of this, but until the AIs can hold what I have in my head, that I actually can't even keep in my head, honestly, because it keeps on flowing out when I work on specific problems. Unless AI can keep more than I can keep in my head when solving every single problem it approaches, we're not going here anytime soon. Yeah, that makes sense to me. So wasn't this an AI question? It's talking about tokens. Sorry, did I misunderstand this? I thought. So, yeah, in any case, a little bit of a tangent. Where were we? I don't even know where we were anymore, honestly. That got so deep down. Yeah, I was going to start talking about effects, I think is where we got to. And I was saying that there are some different approaches here. The PEZ effects must be known at computation time. Okay, this is a true story. And actually, let me pull something up here, because Rich Harris actually responded to my article, because he said he disagreed, and I think he has a right to disagree here. Let me see if I can actually find it. Okay, because in between posts I disagreed. He didn't argue with me about the flush semantics, funnily enough, which is actually, I think, the trickier one. But if async is only discovered during side effects, it's already too late, which is true. The solution is to update async stuff first, then run side effects once resolved. Repeat until it's settled. So you have something like this, and slug changes, right? Okay. Then the post starts updating immediately. In other words, while it looks like a derived, it's actually a special kind of effect that gets a jump on the queue along with the control flow. The compiler creates these effects where they see a way. So he's basically describing what Svelte 5 does, which is how they get this thing. So within effects, the world is consistent. You can force inconsistency outside effects, or right slug, blah blah blah, but easily avoided with the system could warn without necessary. Okay. So basically, what he's pointing at here is, because they have the compiler, they can scan for these await keywords, and then do like a special transform kind of hoisting to ensure that all of that is resolved before running any side effects, which contradicts something that I actually said in the article, and he's right. He's definitely right. There's impact of this change, but it's not impossible. The actual invariant is this one. This is true. This is the physics. This is what you can't actually argue with. But the solution of using a compiler is viable in some cases where I said it might not be. So why is this important? I feel like this one's a lot easier to understand, but it's if you pretend these console logs are effects, like each independent effects, like essentially if you have the ability to pause or halt or execution on any one of these, you have no clue what's going to log here. Like pretend A returns the letter A, B returns the letter B, and C returns the letter C initially. What gets console logged? I've used this example on stream, but I really want to nail this down for people here. Can someone tell me if fetch A returns lowercase a, fetch B returns lowercase b, and fetch C returns lowercase c in some kind of like async blocking kind of system, what gets console logged by this effect? Obviously, it depends on the system, but I'm like very much open to guesses here. Right. I mean, you obviously have to answer that with this thing. Like, do we assume that they're null initially, or do we assume that they throw, or do we assume, like I use signal semantics here. Now, if they were awaited, granted, then the answer is fairly straightforward. It would log A, then B, then C. Right? Yeah, I'm saying that these three are promises. I'm just saying if you have some sort of system that absorbs these promises, right? So, yeah, so for Robbie saying, like, if you throw, it's A, B, A, B, C. Maybe. It could also be A, B, C. And I think it can also be... There's a world where it's ABC, I think. Is there a world where it's ABC? Yes, there is a world where it can be also ABC. If C resolves first, how would it be? Yeah, and it can also be AB, ABC. Yeah, that's the last one. I think we got them all. Yeah. Perfect. I think we captured them all. So we got ABC, 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 and AB, ABC. Right. And you might be like, who cares? They're console logs. But picture if this was actual side effects, the work you have to do. I know that effect will run only when all the problems are run, so that you showed a long time ago, right? Well, here's the thing. I'm just saying in general, we don't actually know. It could be all of those. Yes, that's yes, that's where I'm getting to here. It's even more fun if these can get updated after the fact. So that's initial run. What if B triggers an update later, and then while it's updating, A triggers an update? Like, honestly, you don't know. And that's only one effect. What if these were all separate effects, right? And you need all the effects to run at the same time to be synchronous, but each A, B, and C are each logged in a separate effect. So, A is there, so you go and log it, and then you hit B, and then oh crap, it's async, I can't log it. You've now broken in the same sort of way because you weren't able to resolve all the effects. You know, like what if these are based on the same change, like count, double count? What if these were all double count, triple count, quadruple count, right? You've now broken the chain somewhere. So now you show the count and you show double, but you don't have triple or quadruple yet. So you show the old value or you show null, or like the UI affordances can always be figured out because you can always design around them. But I'm talking about like the consistency in your data graph. What is this supposed to do? See, it doesn't really matter until you get to the side effects where people can see though that you actually have a problem here. Because if A, B, A, B, C, A, B, C, if nobody sees this progression, there's an efficiency question, obviously, but like for performance. But generally speaking, it doesn't matter because, you know, if no one's, you know, tree falls in the woods, no one there to hear, like there's no side effect. But as soon as you add side effects to the equation, it's not just enough to know all the dependencies up front in a particular effect, because like if I rewrote this example to something like this, like if I took this and I was like, okay, simple, const A equals A, const B equals B, const C equals C, and then I just went like, if I just did this, and it's like, okay, no problem, guys. And you asked me what it logged. It's actually really easy now because we can just say it logs ABC. If there's any kind of pausing or interruption value here, no matter what the order is, this will log ABC every time. Right. If you make it a wait, I mean, there's one challenge with this, which you already know, is that reactive tracking is synchronous. So in order to do that, you would actually also have to wrap the wrapper with the context somehow, or like async context or something. So, and honestly, I'm not even sure how I feel about that. I think my perspective is changing a bit over time, but like traditionally, I don't even like the idea of tracking after a wait. I don't think it makes sense because now you're connecting to places in time that you shouldn't be. Like I actually think the sync constraint on tracking is actually a really, really good thing because you don't necessarily like if you track before and a wait and then track after a wait, you don't want to necessarily start the whole thing over, especially if you're doing expensive work. Now, obviously, you can say hoist the fetching outside just to wait the thing, but then why are you even awaiting in there anyways? You're forcing a microtask on something that doesn't need to be a microtask. Like the whole shape of the solution is awkward. Yeah. So because if this throws or this throws or this blocks, we basically move everything down is what I'm trying to say. But the problem with this is that's fine for one effect. Now I have two effects. This one depends on this, and this one depends on this. Ta-da. I have the same problem. It's not enough to hoist it to the beginning of the function. I need to run all of these before I run any of these. Yeah, but you understand the whole problem is throwing. I am saying throwing, but throwing is too late if you interleave. If you have the initial problem that I have in my article, throwing is too late here. If you throw at B, you've already ran A. Throwing doesn't solve this. You know, awaiting does because it has true continuations, but now you are in an async world. Do you wait every value? Well, no, you wait promises, which means like there's consequences of being colored, and we'll talk about those a bit more in a minute. But what I'm getting at is this is why there is an important distinction here. My premise that you have to like basically do what React does with dependency arrays is because it's colorless. If you are colored, you have the ability to know what you're dealing with ahead of time, like Rich was talking about, like with his compiler. But there is still like an awkwardness. Like if there wasn't a compiler, let's say you were completely runtime, you wanted this solution to work without any fancy compilers, just be pure JS signals library. Sound like a library you know, right? I'm big on plain JS from like the runtime perspective on that side. We don't compile your syntax. We compile your templates. That's it. And what I'm getting at here is in that kind of world, it's a lot harder because yes, you can await in here. You can await in here. Let's like don't get me wrong. Now we're awaiting, right? In fact, we can even await our original example, right? Let's just go back. Let's go back. Let's await our original example. So now await, because we know that these aren't actually async signals, they're signals of promises, okay? So now we're awaiting them, right? This will log ABC, technically, but it'll also always log it as a microtask. It will never log ABC, right? It'll never log, even after the fact, even when updates happen or whatever, it never logs ABC. It always logs A, B, C. Right. And and these other consequences here potentially. I don't know if you're expecting like it to trigger like lazy. Yeah. Like the problem is, and this isn't avoidable by you, the await keyword does this. Now, if you made your own venables, like made a special signal like this, and then had your own read semantics, but even then, you need the this is actually tricky. I don't think you can do this without a compiler because await means async function actually means 100% microtask. And if you wrap it, you lose that still. There's no type of wrapping that avoids that microtask. What you can do, if you look at, like, go look at Svelte compile code, these awaits disappear. They actually compile them out. I mean, it's clever, but there's other impacts of this. Do we need promise all? You could, but promise all again only helps us in this scope. You know what I mean? Like, promise all will at least push it onto, I think, one microtask instead of multiple. Yeah, I mean, we need that as well. We also need read A, but I'm saying read A enough isn't read isn't enough here to avoid the microtask. I mean, monkey patch all side effects and then entire DOM and defer them automatically. I mean, what I'm getting at here is I'm hoping you're starting to see that even though we're working in a computer world, that there are real constraints to the system. There is physics. Now, in my article, I said that the solution was this, right? It looks like a dependency array because it is basically a dependency array. Because if it doesn't have to be a dependency array, but I'll show you some key differences here. But if you do this now, you separate the tracking from this. You can do all of this before you do all of this, and more so if you do this, and this one has B and C, to go back to my other example, and this one has A, at which point it doesn't even need to be wrapped. In fact, we can just do A, and then this one can be A. Sorry, get rid of A. If we do this, we can run this and this before we run this or this, and our system is consistent. And this did not take a compiler. It did not take any, it does not force microtasks on you ever, except for when it has to wait. It doesn't force like after the fact microtasks. Like if these values are available to you, then that's exactly what you get. The new syntax is so ugly. It's probably a very good feature. Yeah, I mean, because you really don't don't synchronize state with effects. Don't use effects that you don't need to use effects on. Like I actually, even though this is uglier, I almost view this as a feature. Yes, yes, because generators don't have to go async. So as long as your primitive, um, as long as your primitive exposes the ability to sync read, then like you patch something that isn't a promise, and you could actually also handle your yield in one way. So generators are actually one of the cleanest solutions here, because what you can do with generators, which is really nice, is, and yeah, I mean, Milo actually tried to build a whole version of before there's reactively and there's R3, right? Solid's based on Solid 2.0 started on reactively, which is R1 essentially, and then is built Solid 2.0 now is built on R3. And you guys are probably like, what happened to R2? R2 was built completely on generators. So what's cool about generators is you can do this. There's two things really cool about generators. Console.log yield a. We'll do it like this. What's really cool about generators is that we don't care. First of all, you notice there's no function call here. It's because the yield can be just the read. We don't actually need to call a function here, and even if it's async, it can happen after. And so instead of having explicit read call, we can actually resume our context simply by doing the yield here. So like we don't actually, even though this is like could be async, not async, we don't know. We have the ability to continue without having a special track function or read function. Secondly, we don't care if it's async. If it's a promise, if it's async, whatever, we can handle it. That detail is buried. So technically, this is like basically perfect, except for everything that you ever do from now on is going to be wrapped in a generator function. And what else is not great about this? Performance of generators is generally like when you try and make it like Milo basically had to just stop this experiment because of performance. And now, so this might be the question where someone asked earlier, is performance a gap on the reactive systems? In this case, yes. We also played with this in Marco. Like on the server rendering, this actually makes a ton more sense because I was saying there's actually a Crank.js, which is based on generators, which also is an interesting experiment. I don't think components should be generators. I think that was the issue with Crank. Like I think if you had a run once model with reactivity as generators, that would be very interesting. But Crank was almost like a React model in a sense, like where like the components were generators because they were trying to like do async flow. I think with a small refinement, generators is a very interesting place because yield hides all the async semantics in a way that is consistent, allows you to do tracking and completely works. So yes, but there's a couple gaps. People don't get generator functions generally. Like it's like really hard. People get like almost upset when they see them. And secondly, performance is terrible. Really? It's going to be the same problem as await read 8. Can't I No, I mean, oh no. Does it force? It doesn't. It doesn't force me into a microtask too. I'm saying like, what if my primitive still absorbs the fact that it's a promise? Like if A is a promise and it's colorful, yes, but I think if this is colorless, this doesn't have the same problem. I mean, we tested this less than like maybe 6 months ago. I also think that this is a little bit too exotic, as people are saying. Like it's pretty really exotic. Like even we're testing the idea by bringing generators into our actions. I think. Oh, right, right. Well, no, I won't. No, my point was that it can be synchronous. This can be synchronous. Yeah, but I don't think it matters. I don't think it. Yeah, yeah, I get what you're saying. Like you're basically opting into a model where you're okay if some side effects show up later. Like this is not good for rendering. Like the DOM. Yeah, you're right. The late discovery is still a problem. I was thinking that. Yeah, you know what? Yeah, late. Yeah, yeah. This is this isn't even 100% solution. This is like good in the sense that like the effect itself executing is fine, but it doesn't actually again doesn't help us really with like this either. You know, like this is still a problem because we don't discover this until I mean yeah yeah, yeah, exactly. Thanks, Robbie. And you guys are dead on. I got way too excited about generators. So yes, supporting my this is physics. That's not what impression I got. Maybe there's some new stuff that I haven't seen yet, and I'm excited to. My impression is more that what I'm talking about is more like the Rust of JavaScript frameworks. We'll see when we get into Solid 2.0, for better or for worse, because the way that you constrain this stuff is through lots of errors and control mechanisms. And Remix is more like the jQuery. Like it's like lets you write as much garbage as you can, but then it can absorb it. So, okay. Well, I mean, so yeah, yes. So our conclusion is actually generators don't solve this either. So you're forced to basically do some kind of in scope compiler analysis, or you know, just freaking split the effects already. Now, is this? I think this is better than React's dependency arrays for multiple reasons. First of all, first simple thing is we have prior art here. Vue watchers have done this for years, even if it was for slightly different reasons. It proves that people can work with this. It's not. You, I don't remember people complaining about Vue watchers because Vue only got the combined effect like in like some point in Vue 3. I think you had to do watchers all through Vue 2. Nobody cared. Like it wasn't like React. And I think there's a couple reasons for this. First of all, this stuff is dynamic still. It's not a fixed thing. You can conditionally subscribe. You can change the dependency arrays. You can like it doesn't have to be an array. It can be an object. It could be a single value. It could be whatever the hell you want. It can be deep. It can be nested. It could be whatever does shape, form, whatever you need to track. It can be done. Don't get me wrong. There's pain point here around deeply conditional logic stuff that probably should be split into multiple effects, for example, or like requires stuff. Like, don't get me wrong. There's limits here, but purely point one compared to something like React is it is still very much dynamic. It can still discover dependencies when you call a function that isn't in scope, right? Second difference, values are passed through. You don't read C in here, like as a function, you read it from here, which means that, oh, what if I miss a dependency? You don't miss a dependency, because if you try and read C in here, we'll tell you that you're reading in an untracked scope. I think I finally got that bug fixed, that it wasn't working. No, I probably should update my template here, actually. Let's go stack blitz for a second and go, what have we got? Beta template, solid 2.0 beta template. We did a release today, right? That's what I was doing a few minutes ago. Let's update the template to beta 4. Oh no, sorry, this one's beta 2 still, I think. It might be beta 3. Let's update this one to beta 4 and beta 4. Save. Let's just refresh the whole thing. Should an effect also throw when you read a signal in effect inside of an effect, like inside the back half? Maybe throw. I've been playing with warnings, but let's fork this and play a bit, because hopefully those things that I was trying to show in the previous stream actually work now. Okay. So let's go here. So our first thing is, let's gut all of this stuff for a second and just give myself a hello. Am I alive? Yeah, hello, I'm alive. Beautiful. Okay. Second thing we want to do. We want to, what is it? Import, create signal, and probably create effect from solid.js. Beautiful. Okay. So let's go const count. We're just making a counter. Set count equals create signal 0. Beautiful. I mean, we can count in the UI just for fun. Whatever, let's just make it a button. Yeah, I'm glad HMR is working properly now. Click, do the simple thing, set count C +1. Lovely. Okay, cool. Counter working. Okay, so let's create our effect. Create effect. And let's make it depend on C, but then do something funny like console.log C. Sorry, it's count. Depend on count. In console.log count. Sorry, I don't know why I refreshed there. I didn't need to. Is this gonna work properly? Reactive value read directly in an effect callback will not update. Move it to the tracking scope, JSX, a memo, or effects compute function. There we go. Thank God. So, right, and it's gonna keep on bugging you about this. So right off the bat, if you try to read a reactive value on the back half of an effect like this, it's going to tell you you are doing bad things. Okay. Thank you. Just like if you tried to read count out here at the top of your component, it should also tell you that you're doing bad things. Although I'm not seeing it. Why is that one still not working? Oh, it's annoying. I spent so much trying to fix this. It actually gives you the component name and everything. Oh man, that's so annoying. At least the back half of the effect one's working. I fixed, you know what it is? Solid refresh. I had the fix solid refresh. That's why. Let's remove our node module, remove our package lock, the pnpm lock YAML, and let's try this again. Yeah, devc4 side effects are much better than dev side through React. Yeah, well, because you pass them through, right? All right, so hopefully this was just a module update issue. Yes. I don't. Reactive value read directly anonymous will not update. Move it into a tracking scope. It's anonymous because of this style. Oh, that's unfortunate. It can't tell the name. Like if this was called function app, it would know. Like if this was instead function app, it happens. Reactive, oh, but it's your compiled name. That's interesting. Reactive values read directly in app2 will not update. Move it to tracking scope. JSX memo thing. That's okay. It's not perfect, but you get the idea. Reactive value read directly in effect callback will not update. So what you understand what I'm getting at here. We were talking about the rust of JavaScript frameworks, right? The funny thing is, you might view this like, does that mean Solid has a bunch of hook rules? There's now a second rule. There used to be a rule about losing reactivity, right? You don't want to read in a top level scope, right? Now there is a second rule, which is that you don't want to write in a tracking scope. So, but they essentially are the same rules that filter out of this. But what's key about this, which as I said makes me really, really happy, is silly stuff now like if someone does something like counter and does things like what do we want them to do here? Destructure. And they're like, damn, why does this count never update? You know what I mean? Well, it starts by actually, someone takes some React code, right? Fine. I mean, this is what count is a number, whatever. Okay. Sorry. Did I do that, bro? I did something that broke something. That's funny. I'll figure it out in a minute. Let's make this. Make it this. Go counter. Count equals count. Did I break? Okay. HMR is not perfect. Hopefully what we will see here is, why am I not seeing the, it's funny. Reactive value read directly in the callback will not update. Where is destructuring? Should have found that one. Let me get rid of the effect callback one for a second. There's so many other warnings in Stack Blitz. Yeah, reactive value read directly in counter 2 will not update. Move it inside a tracking scope. I guess it's solid refresh, which is renaming everything. Because it has to make a wrapper. That's funny. But you get my point. Destructuring, it basically tells you that you've read an encounter and it's not going to update. I don't even know. I don't make opinions about stuff like this. I just wanted to kind of like sanity check here that this stuff works. So yeah, essentially annoying all the weird Stack blitz issues, you can actually see that this doesn't update, and it tells you exactly why it won't update. Move it, reactive value read directly in counter 2 will not update. Move it into a tracking scope, JSX, a memo, or an effect, compute again. So you might not know that you're destructuring props, to be fair, but at least there's a hint. The funniest thing is, since I added all these warnings, AI has gotten like, I mean, AI was already okay at this stuff, but like AI immediately like sees stuff and it's like, oh, there's a warning, I shouldn't do this. Okay, let me rearrange this. Like, especially for like writing tests, it's like almost like an immediate signal for AI that it's doing the wrong thing. It's just like, okay. Yeah, I didn't see this because in tests I don't see this. The name mangling is happening. Like, this is only dev warning, so it's fine. The name mangling is happening because solid refresh. We could probably reverse the name mangling so that the original component name is what gets put here, and that the name, like the mangling, happens to the other one. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's probably a way that I can make this better in solid refresh. No, what's happening here is that I'm I'm destructuring here, which is doing a reactive read. That's the problem. People hit this and they like, we have warnings in our linters to prevent this, but now there's a runtime warning that tells you, hey, reactive value read directly in the counter component will not update. Move it into tracking scope like JSX. So instead of doing it this way, if I change it to props dot count, what'll happen is this warning won't exist anymore, hopefully. Looks like I have preserve log on. Let me see. Or StackBlitz just preserves the log. Okay, whatever. But if I refresh it, you'll see that there's no warning anymore, and that this actually updates properly. Of course, I still need these types here. Count is a number. Log the function itself so it makes it clickable to find the source. Yeah, I need to do that more often. I'll update that in the next version. Thanks. I'm not destructuring a number. I'm destructuring props. Right? Props is an object that has count on it. So what I was doing was I was destructuring props. This is perfectly valid. That's why you see a 0 here. If we initialized at 5, you're going to see 5 here. The problem is it just will never update. People do this in React all the time, but it doesn't work in Solid, and now we warn about it. But just a side note, what I actually wanted to focus on here was that the effects, the shape of effects here, like with create effect, is actually kind of nice from the perspective that people are always like, I'm worried that I'm going to miss a dependency or something. It's like, you're not going to miss a dependency because you wouldn't have it to use. Like, that's not a concern here. You can't log count unless it's a dependence. Like, this kind of flows out of it, right? Because if you try and read it directly, then it's going to cause you an issue. So this basically gives you the right guardrails, because you're not going to miss dependencies. You're going to maybe oversubscribe. Yeah, getting into this is a godsend. I mean, to be fair, a lot of these can be found by ESLints, but there's ones that can't be. Like, the back half of effects is probably not easy discovered by ESLint. I guess it could. It could look literally for the signature, but it might not find it in my custom effect or something. You know, like these can be anything. This can be a custom hook. No, and I'm glad you asked because that we're in the next area. Can a compiler solve this? And I'm wrong about this in a certain sense, but I'm not wrong on the other sense here, because this is the first thing that people go to when they're talking about this. And the thing is, compiler can solve the general problem, as Rich pointed out, to a certain degree if you have colored async, but a compiler can't undo